Hi, I'm Mallory with Let's Make Baskets. We are so excited to have you join us today to weave the basic basket. Before you get started, please take a look at your kit. The list of material in your kit is posted here on the screen. In a couple seconds, it'll be followed by the tool recommendations. These are very helpful while creating your basket. Take a moment and fill your sink or your bathtub with water. You should take the spokes and the weavers and submerge them in water for about 20 minutes before you start weaving. This will ensure that your pieces are flexible while you weave your basket together. You'll notice that you have a couple extra pieces. That's okay. They are in your kit just to make sure you have enough to complete the basket. Let's join Kay in the studio now to get started.
So today we're going to make this basket. You can see it here. It's a small utility basket. You will find places everywhere in your home to use these. And here is a much more natural looking one with a muted tone. And that obviously holds our scrunchies perfectly. So this is what we're making today. This is what you receive in your kit. You're going to have 4 extra long spokes and 11 shorter ones. I've already soaked them for 20 minutes. And we are ready to begin laying out our mat. So we have a right side and a wrong side. If you've been following us, you'll know these tips, but they're worth repeating.
Take a moment and look at the images on your screen. These will help you determine the right side and the wrong side of the reed as you continue to weave your basket.
We begin by laying them out. 3 by 3 is the point in which you will feel your spokes lock into place. It's a little awkward until you get them lined up like that, but just stick with it. Remember to check for hairy side and smooth side. Now my long spokes are the horizontal, and the short ones are vertical. You can see the pattern starting here. My vertical spoke is going over and then under, so my next one is going to go under and then over. We're at a 2 by 2, 2 more spokes, and this is going to lock in place very nicely. I checked for my right side and my wrong side, and this spoke is lining up right next to the other one, going over and then under.
Continue adding spokes into the mat in an over-under pattern. The final result will be 4 spokes horizontally and 11 spokes vertically, as Kay shows in the video.
There's no rhyme or reason to vertical or horizontal. It's however you want to start laying them out, as long as you're putting them in the over-under pattern next to each other. And you want to be basically center. See how nicely that is locked into place now? You can give it a little movement. It doesn't feel so cumbersome under your hands. And now I can use 2 hands and move quickly along adding these other spokes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And I need my 4th horizontal. Under, over, under, over. You don't have to think about everything at once. I've got it in the right weaving pattern, and now I'm sliding it in next to the other horizontal spokes. And my eye moves now to try to make these squares in the middle more evenly spaced. You can see how the spokes on the ends here are slightly off from the last weaver. So I'm going to even that up just by sliding it along. You can use a ruler. My original basket teacher was against rulers etc. She did everything by eye, and you'll get there too. If you're comfortable though, just measure it up and see what your length is off either end. That's about 9 inches, and that is 2. Again, everything is approximate. Now we're going to begin step 2. We're preparing the basket to accept the weavers. And you just want to give your spokes a slight bend. I'm rolling it right over my finger. I'm not bending them in half. I'm just rolling them up around the curve of my finger so that when I have my weaver, it's going to be easier to put it in place and have the basket begin to stand. It's also good to know that the size that the mat appears to be is smaller than what the actual basket will be. The basket naturally bows out as you build it. So this looks kind of narrow when you look at it, and you have to remember it will bow out and it'll be a wider basket in the end. All right, that's all 4 sides, and as you noticed, I kept turning the mat because you always want to keep your work right in front of you. Let me grab our first weaver. All right, this is a beautiful, I was talking about color before, and if you can see, look at that nice little brown stripe, the different coloration. I think that's beautiful. So I look for that, and I can't wait to line that up in my first weaver. Don't forget, there's a right side and a wrong side. That hairy side goes to the in. You keep the good side against you. So this is how we start a basket. This spoke lies underneath that spoke, and that is the one we want to give a backbone to. Stand it straight up, and your weaver goes right to the very next spoke. You want to hide the end when this one eventually stands as we come all the way around. That end will be hidden. So think of it as giving a backbone to the spoke that you lifted up off your work surface. Got my handy clothespins, and now I'm just going to keep going around. It's in the back of this spoke, so I want it in the front of this spoke. And then I want the weaver to come behind this one. This first row is going to feel a little cumbersome, but you just keep at it. Use as many clothespins as you feel helps keep your work in place. As you approach a corner, it's the same thing. I'm behind this spoke, so I'm going to be in front of that one. And for now, that spoke stays laying down. Then I'm going to stand this up. Need a little more room, and I'm going to put my weaver right where I want it on the corner. I'm using my index finger to hold it against that spoke so that there's no gapping. I'm going to clip it from this side so that it stays out of my way as I move to the next. Turning the basket to keep my work right in front of me. Working the corners to hold it in place, and just continue around. Goes behind that one, so in front of the next one. I know I'm still doing the right pattern because I'm lifting the spoke up off my work surface to give it a backbone.
And Kay, I think it's a good point to note that you're being very intentional about lifting these up to give the basket its shape early on.
Very much so. You want to be the boss of the spokes. Don't let the spokes or the weaver determine what your basket looks like. Use clips, take your time. It's these first few foundational rows that will determine the outcome of your basket. So just take it slow, keep your work right in front of you, and very intentionally bend around a corner. You don't want a big gaping corner. You keep it right behind this one and right in front of the next one, and clip it again. See how my thumb is holding the weaver right there while I lift this next one and place it behind. Approach another corner. I'm going to use another clip on this end. So we arrive back where we started. So I need to move this clothespin in order to finish this first weaver. You'll see as you come back, here we meet on this spoke. The rule is always you bring your weaver, line them up between four, for the next four spokes. So if this is 1, 2, 3, 4, I want to cut my weaver right at the end of this fourth spoke overlap. That's waist. And then you flip them. You put your weaver as you come around to the inside, and the weaver end that was your starting point goes to the outside right here. And when your spoke stands up, your ends are hidden.
Here is a closer look at what it looks like when you flip the weavers in reverse.
All right, this basket is going to be accented with the color purple. So the weaver is very long. You're going to get 2 or 3 rows out of this, and as your experience grows, you'll like using the long weaver because there's less waste. However, if you wanted to cut it to make it a smaller piece, maybe a more manageable piece as you get familiar with weaving, you can wrap it around the basket, and you want to measure generously, not overly generous, but you have to overlap for 4 spokes. So I'm wrapping it around very loosely. You can see it's going to be tighter than that, and mark it here with my thumb, and you would cut it right there and use that piece. And then of course you're still going to fine tune it as you come to the end of your weaving row and overlap, but that would make it probably a little more manageable for a beginner. I'm going to go ahead and keep it as a long piece and show you how that's done. So here's a tip I wanted to share with you. Your colored weavers will bleed, so as you pull them out of the water, try to wipe off the excess water. Just run it through on a rag between your hands. Look at all the excess color. You don't want that bleeding into your natural colored spokes and weavers. And by doing this, it'll take away a lot of the extra. We're ready to begin our first color row. I'm looking at the reed to find the right side and the wrong side. This is another very nice piece of reed. So I can't find any hairs, and I'm running my fingers all the way along to make sure that that's true of the whole piece, and I'm just going to begin. Our first row, you can see the overlap here where we started and ended. I don't want to start my second row right on top of that, because in the end, if all your starts and stops are on one side, it's hard to keep that even looking. It will be a little bit bulky and a little bit off. Because my short end is so very narrow, I'm going to turn it twice and go to the opposite side and start my color on the long side opposite of where I started and ended the first row. In this row, you're going to be picking up the spokes that are still lying down, that weren't part of that first row. And just like the other, I want to put my color behind, putting it in front of the spoke that is standing up and behind the next one. And very intentionally start your color in front of and behind each of the spokes. I need to clip it so it's not going to fall out of place. And then it's just in front of, remove what's ever in your way, and bend it. Give it a slight bend right behind the next spoke. Stand this one up and just keep working it. Take your time, moving that weaver very intentionally in front of and behind, and don't let your work get too far ahead of you. I'm approaching a corner. Take out my clip, make sure my weaver is right where I want it to be. It's on the inside of this side of the corner, and then don't miss those spokes laying down. Stand them up and weave them in. I'm going to show you a little trick to help hold your corners in place as you begin. I like taking the two cornered pieces and up near the top. We don't want to restrict them down below. It could split them, but way up at the top, just pinch them together so that it helps hold the corner in place as you move along. The same rule of 3 is true for weaving up the sides of the basket. After 3 rows, you're going to find it gets much easier. So stay with it. Get your weavers right where you want them to be on each spoke. Keep your work right in front of you. And take your time and build that foundation. Whoops, I just unwove. I'm weaving over the overlap right here. Just be sure to give it your full attention. Your smaller colored weaver is not as thick as that first row, and that's okay. It's all going to blend in nicely in the end. Stand up my spoke. It was starting to slant a little bit. You'll find that the spokes like to lean in the direction that you're weaving. I weave left to right. You may find it more comfortable to weave right to left. So whatever method you're going, just take your time, work around each spoke and stand them up straight. Don't let them lean in the direction of the weave. Here I am around another corner. Put my color in, and then I'm going to go back and just hold these two corner pieces together. Keeping my work in front of me around that final corner. You can see I'm just coming into where the weaver is behind this other one. Well, that clothespin didn't last very long. I'm going to clip my corner together, turn my basket on its side. Sometimes that's easier for a couple of spokes. You can see my spoke is behind and it's hanging over just a little bit, so I may want to trim that. I'm going to line it up. This was my first, second, third. Here's my fourth spoke long. I'm going to trim this right at the end of the fourth spoke. Put my weaver to the side. It's going to be my next row. And yeah, you don't want to drop your weavers on the floor, because then when you step on them and they pop in half, you're really mad at yourself. I'm going to take this out a little. This happens a lot. Your spokes, as they find their place and you make sure they're even, sometimes your ends end up being a little longer than you first intended. So here's where we overlap. I'm tucking it behind the weaver, starting point, so that it hides my ends.
Sometimes I have a difficult time visualizing where that fourth one is, and I second guess myself, so I do cut them a little bit long occasionally, and then once you tuck it and you can see where it's going to be hidden, then you can make the final cut. It's easier to cut it long the first time than it is when it's too short.
That's a great tip. Yep. All right, and there's your first row of color. because we're still within those first 3 foundational rows, I'm going to go all the way around to the other side again. And this is where our first row overlapped. I'm still not going to start right above it. I'm going to start down here for this 3rd row. Again, you're just trying to keep in mind that you want an even overlap worked out around all sides of the basket, so no one side gets heavy at the end with all of the overlaps. I'm checking for the right side and the wrong side always. I'm gonna unclip the corner. Work right around the corners. You don't ever want to pull the weaver too tight on the corner because you've got those 2 spokes with not much room between them anyway. So make sure you're fair with the tension. Already I'm needing less and less clothespins with this, even just halfway through with this color row. Now right here I'm noticing my color row, the end is sticking out still a little more. I'm going to stop right here and fix that. I'm going to back this 2nd row up a little. I'm going to pop this end out, trim it ever so slightly again while it's easy to do so, and just tuck it right back in rather than getting several rows up and wishing I had done it then. Here's another corner. It's a little bit of a bubble there. I'm going to give that spoke a slight upward tug. Make sure my tension is fair. Continue right around. Coming back to my final side.
It's amazing how that 3rd row is like magic. It really just pulls everything into place.
It really does so many times. It's the first 3 rows that will take you the most time and concentration, but believe us, hang in there, get 3, and then reevaluate. So here I'm coming up. This is, you can't see it, but behind there is the starting point. So that's my number 1 spoke. 2, 3, 4. I'm going to trim my color right to the end of this 4th spoke. Put my weaver on the table so I don't step on it. And tuck in the end of this weaver underneath and behind the starting point, so all the ends are hidden, just like that. That one's pretty close to being right at the edge of the spoke. There you have it. Look at the shape already. I'm going to spend a minute here, just ever so slightly pulling up on the spokes, just to make sure there's no bubbles. Realigning, see how this has come off line a little bit, out of line with each other. I'm just using my fingers and tucking them back under and over each other, pushing down my color rows. The corners look great. The ends look good. Checking the bottom. My squares are all still pretty evenly spaced, and the spokes are straight up. They're not leaning in the way that they're being woven. We are in good shape. I'm going to continue on and do 3 more rows. We have 5 total color rows.
Are you going to start at one of the narrow ends, or are we going to continue starting on the sides?
We are ready. We can start at a narrow end. Now you only have 4 spokes at the end, so because my basket is well established, I'm going to start it behind 1 spoke, and I know that in the end I'm only going to overlap 2. You have to either use 2 or 4. If you overlap over 3 spokes, one of the ends ends up sticking out. So you really always, almost always want to try the 4. But this is a small basket. We're not going to be carrying around anything too heavy in it, which is always a consideration. In your bigger baskets, you would not want to take this little shortcut. But for this smaller one, this is going to work out just fine. So I'm behind this spoke, in front of that one. Immediately I'm on a corner. I'm going to give it fair tension at the corner, not too tight. I don't want to bend in the corner spokes, and I don't want my work to get too far ahead of me. I always just over one, under one, tap it into place. Over one, under one, push it down into place. They're all standing straight. You can see how the third row really makes the color pop. I'll tell you the difference in the spokes here. This one is very thick, so I'm watching this corner carefully. I don't want this spoke to overrule the strength of this other spoke, so making sure I don't pull that too tight. Again, that's just the nature of using a natural item. There'll be different feels to the material, and that's okay. It's all workable.
You bring up a great point. The weaver itself is not in a straight line, right? I mean, when you look up through the spokes, it actually weaves in and out in almost a wave pattern rather than a straight line, so that you know that you're not pulling too tight.
Yes, exactly. So here we are back at the beginning. We're overlapping just 2 spokes. It begins here, so I want to end generously at the end of this spoke. I'm going to reverse them. I made that a little too long. Again, it's always better to cut a little too long. What do they say? Measure twice, cut once. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And there, that's, the basket can support those ends there. It works. And we're going to turn it and go to another side. I probably wouldn't jump to the opposite. I'll just go to this side and start with row number 4. All right, so we finished row 3. Row 4 and 5 are up next. You're just going to continue the way we were. This is a good point. My basket's getting a little bit dry, so it's time to dunk it in the water just for 30 seconds or a minute. Make sure everything stays pliable, and we'll meet back here at the end of the color rows. Okay, so how did you do? Here are the 5 rows of color, all lined up. My spokes are nicely vertical. My rows are pushed together. I don't want to see spaces between them. You can see a little here between the bottom and the top. That's fine. And we're ready to start the rim row. You're going to find... All right, so we're finished with our color. I'm just noticing again, this first weaver has poked out again just a little. I am going to push it back up and under. Now is the time to make any final changes. There, and just hide it. Look around, make sure all sides look good to you. And then reevaluate where you ended last. This is my overlap from my final weaver. So I'm going to go to the opposite side to begin my rim row. You're going to find 3 pieces. You should have these 3 pieces left, along with your lashing and your filler, the round reed, that's the filler. Some of this reed has such beautiful color in it that I'm going to pick my favorite piece. This is called 5/8, It's got some nice detail color. See the lines here in the spoke? That's a beautiful piece. And you want to make sure you're looking at the right side and not the wrong side, because sometimes there's beautiful color on one side and not very much on the other. I think these have beautiful. Beautiful color. But then when I went to this one, I noticed this gray spot. And you'll learn this with experience too. Although I love the inconsistency in the color of the natural product, I know that by putting this color next to my purple, in the end, that might look like it bled out, and it might not feel like a clean look to some of our weavers. So here's a trick. Your rim row ends up being hidden by both the inside and the outside rows that are going to wrap around it before we do the lashing. So I've decided to hide this gray spot on my rim row, which will be buried in between the other two rims. It's not a weakness, it's not a problem, and if you like that gray spot, you could probably figure out a way to feature it somewhere else if that's your taste. This is where your artistry and creativity comes forward. All right, so double checking for my overlap side, it's on the opposite side. This is the weaver I'm choosing to hide in the middle, and we begin. Going behind one spoke and in front of the next, and it's a whole different feel from the 1/4 inch that we were just using, the 1/4 inch colored. Oops, I just bent that and I split the end a little bit. So I'm going to cut off a little bit of the end and begin again. Just trying to push it down, and I didn't support it well enough. There's the weaver. Again, we're very intentional, putting it in front of and behind with just enough tension between the weavers, between the spokes. It should sit on top of the last weaver. Bring it to sit right in the corner. Right on top of your weaver. Continue all the way around, making sure everything is nice and wet. The wider the reed, the easier it is to split it when you're giving it these slight bends. And coming back to my starting place. Same rule, 4 spokes. 1, 2, 3, 4 is where I want to cut it. The end of the 4th spoke. And then hiding both ends. Try to slide it right down in behind it. I pull slightly up on the starting point without, you want to pull from the bottom, you don't pull it from the middle. Could split it and just settle it in on top of that last row. There. There's a little bit of space between the last weaving row and where this overlap is, and that's okay. Our lashing is going to fit in there beautifully and fill that space. But don't let it lift up everywhere. If clothespins are helpful, feel free to use them. I'm also going to use my awl just to tuck in the end. And I know this rim row is going to be hidden, but I still want it to sit nice. Okay.
So it's a little thick, right?
It is.
I mean, you can see it in this one too, where you ended up doing it. You end up getting quite a buildup there, but that's to be expected. So even if it feels thick right now, just know that you'll be able to lash it and get it to be pretty consistent all the way around.
The lashing does a double duty. It binds it all together, but it also disguises that thicker area. So there you are. All right, so we have our rim row in and overlapped. Now it's time to lock in the spokes, holding in all of your rows. So here we go. The spokes on the outside of that rim row, we are going to bend right over the top and tuck inside. And it's sort of like fingers holding down all the rows. So with all of these spokes standing up, I find it easier to cut off the spokes that are on the inside of this rim row. You can see right here, this spoke, I'm going in and behind and chopping it off just as flush as I can. I've got an opportunity later to really cut that flush and make it a flush cut. But don't cut the outside ones. We're just cutting these off on the inside to get them out of our way. So we're bending right over the top. Again, we're not cinching, we're not trying to crack any, but bend it over the top and with your thumb measure down. We are going to go, that is an overlap row, so that's going to be a lot of stress. I'm just going to plan to tuck it right under that one. So I'm going to measure down that far, make a mark, cut my spoke at a slight point, open up the weaver with my awl, and tuck it right behind there. It is a little long, it sticks out below the weaver, and I want to trim off a little more, so I just slide it back out, cut off a little more, and slide it right back in again. There you go. Move to several spokes down or even over to the other side. We want to tuck in the spokes and hold the rim down from all different angles, working in a cross pattern rather than right next to each other. When you do that, you might pop up the other side. If I did all one side, it's tight, it's down, the other side may pop up. So do a crisscross pattern. Measuring down to my thumb, slight point, lift up the weaver I'm going behind, and slide it right in behind your awl. Gonna go to this end, I pull up on the spoke. Oh, this is that real thick weaver spoke that I've had. And I am going to go, I may go under both of those with this one. This one wants to have a mind of its own. Gently lift the weaver and guide your spoke underneath it. Lift the next one. If it's that long, and guide it right down in behind that other one as well.
Continue tucking all spokes down underneath the weaver on the interior of the basket until all spokes are completed. Here are a few pointers from Kay and best practices as you continue to tuck the spokes.
That one came apart a little bit. You can see here as I bent it, some of that lifted up. When we trim these other ones, we can trim that back a little too. Make sure your basket is wet at this point. Again, it might be some of the spokes if you feel like they're drying out. Then take them back into the sink and give them a quick bath. So that spoke just split on me as I was trying to tuck it. I'm gonna take it back just to the edge of the rim. Since I buckled this, it's gonna be very hard to get it in. I'll just trim it off. I still have a good half of the spoke left, and I will trim that end in. Now is a great time to use your slanted snippers and trim them right down to even with the rim row. These little pieces can go flying, so have your goggles on or anyone else in the room with you. This one I wanted you to see, I wanted to point out to you. As I bent that one and tucked it in, you can see how some of the reed pulled away. And it didn't break all the way through. There's still enough of the material that bent and tucked, but I am going to trim off these jagged edges. You can see that just makes it a lot neater. So go all the way around, trimming the spokes that were on the inside, especially, but that was another one that separated. Sometimes when the spokes are very thick, they'll separate like that when you bend them, because this is a complete bend in half. So the spokes around it will support it. It really is not a weakness in the basket. Just keep working around. There, nice flush top. You might notice me squeezing it a little. You can keep it rounded. I'm just shaping it a little. If you wanted a true square, now would be a good time to really squeeze it and shape it in. Looking inside, make sure my ends are tucked. They're straight. I think it looks great. We're ready to move on. All right, so here are those other two pieces. I've already selected this one with the color. That's going to be my outside rim. So I'm going to put this one, this is my inside rim row. Looking for the good side and the hairy side. I'm going to put the hairy side, the back, right up against that rim row on the inside. I'm also looking, my overlap is on this side. So because all four ends are going to end up in the same place from these next two rim rows, I'm going to the opposite side and I'm going down here to the left. Need clothespins again. You want to pin this rim tightly up against. See that buckle? You want to make sure it's not tight. This has to have contact all the way around. Our lashing is going to pull it in place around every single spoke. So you don't want to cut your material too tight or too short where it might pull away. Pinching the corners is always a good idea with your clothespins. And just hold it up. You know, you don't want to be pulling it out. Make sure you're standing your basket up straight and clipping down just the right amount of material. So I come into the corner. Those are always the tricky spots. Pinch it right down into place in the corner, keeping the edges level with the other rim row. And here I am right back to my overlap. Same rules, 4 spokes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm gonna cut this inner rim. Oops, I took my eye off it. 1, 2, 3, 4. right down there. That's your inside rim row. Now here's my favorite piece of reed with the detail, and this is my outside rim row. I'm doing the same thing. I'm going to take off the clothespins I just put on and now add in this outside row. So I'm clipping the inside over the rim and to the outside all the way around. All right, so we've got the inside and the outside rims all clipped, and now we've got this filler row. This adds a beautiful detail. As you can see on these other baskets,
as I model,
that this basket is done with the filler, and you can see the rim on this one. It does not have the filler. It's personal preference. If you like the filler, this is where you'd add it in. I'm just laying it, again, all overlap ends are at the same spot. I'm just tucking it in under my clips. When you come to the end, use your thumb on the underside just to give it a nice slight bend. You don't ever want to crack it or snap it by bending it too quickly. It's also key to keep that's been soaking in the water while we were doing the other steps of this basket. It's nice and wet, but still, we're gonna give it a little help with the bend. And the corners are all nicely pinched, and here we come back to the overlap. Now I know as I lash, this is gonna tighten everything up and hold it into its final resting place. I'm not ready to cut this exactly end to end because it's going to change slightly as we're lashing. So I'm just going to leave a little bit of an overlap, enough so that I can do a nice clean trim at the end, but not too much so that it's sticking out in my way when we start to lash, which is our next step. Put my clips back on. Now all our rim is in place. It's all lined up nicely. We are ready to begin lashing. My lasher has been soaking. Your lasher is very long, and you just have to have patience with this step because you don't want to split it or shred it as you're lashing. I like cutting it at a little bit of a point so that it feeds through the lashing, the spaces between the spokes nicely. Don't forget, find your good side and your hairy side. This is a nice piece of lashing, so I'm gonna go with this side. And right where all my ends come together, I am looking for a spot to go down and under and do our fishhook anchor style start. I'm going to slide my lasher right under here. Oops, can you see that? Right under that lever. That's a nice clean spot. You know what, I changed my mind. I'm moving over one and I'm going here for this spot. My weavers end right there. I really shouldn't be starting where they end. I need to go slightly to the right. And there's a little bit of wiggle room there too. If I wanted this spoke as my starting point, I could backtrack these a little bit, but we're gonna go ahead, start at the very next spoke, which is a nice place to start, and move forward from there.
And that allows you to pull all the slack all the way around the basket and terminate it where it's at its tightest point, correct?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what we're doing. This is a final tightening up of everything. I've just slid my lasher right under those 2 rows of color. And I'm not going to do the fish hook. I'm just sliding it under. I think it's nice and tight. It's going to sit right there.
If somebody's basket is a little bit looser, how would they go about doing the fish hook?
You would finish pushing this through. Push it. Mine is not pushing well, so You're going to go continue under this color, pull it down, pinch it through, and then fold it upwards and tuck the end back under here. So literally it's like a fish hook, the flat side against the spoke, up and bend it and tuck it just back under one. Okay? Now I'm making sure that my lasher, first of all, feels good, has no bends in it, I didn't step on it yet, so that's good. No splits. And I want to make sure, you have to imagine it coming up without any twists. There's no room to push a twist through, so you have to make sure you're feeding it correctly as you begin to lash. Glasses for this one. I'm putting my awl just right at the top of this color row and underneath the rim row, bringing it up so you can see it close. I'm wiggling it left to right because I know there's some space in there. If I just, everything is wet, it's malleable, I can slide them around a little. And I'm feeding the lasher through, being careful not to hook it on anything. Nice and flat. I'm not ready to tighten it. I do want to feed it through the next hole before I snug it right down, because I'm going to have to make sure the angles are right. Just a nice, you want to pay attention to how the lasher lies down over the top. It's coming down. I'm careful not to twist it. All right. We're coming straight up and angling it slightly to come down and snug. Now that you don't ever want to pull it too tight. That's I'm really not. It's just making that noise as it comes together. Now I'm just going to be mindful that this is my angle as I continue along. Take your time and hold your lasher in place. Find that next slot. Wiggle it back to left and right just enough so you can feed it through. I like holding my basket so the lashing is falling. You've got gravity working with you. It's just coming straight through naturally and falling. And as I get right down near the end, I'm gonna snug it down, making sure it's as close to those other angles as it can be. I'm going to keep doing this all the way around the basket. So work, continue on, and I'll see you at the other side of the basket. Here we are, 3/4, even more than 3/4 lashed, single lashed around the top of this basket. We had put in the filler with an overlap because as it gets snugged in, we wanted to make sure it would be a nice fit at the end. We're at that point where it's time to trim them because I'm ready to lash over the ends. So I am looking to cut them together in the middle of this spoke because I know my lasher is going to go over the top middle of this spoke. It's approximate. They're going to lay down flat because we have it lashed. There's frequent lashings. There's not too much space between them. So this is how I do the filler. I'm trying to hold it up so you can see, but I better bring it down here.
And would you do it at an angle so that it's mitered and they join together a little bit better and have more of a chance of going under the lasher?
mitered together like this.
Yes.
Ends to ends. So that would be taking some of this one off at this angle.
Yep.
For that kind of a point, and then lifting up the other end, which is now fallen down in there. And cutting the top to meet that as close as you can in the same angle. That gives it a nice clean place to lie. I'm going to loop through a couple of my spokes here, spoke spaces, so that I can line up everything together. Just 2. I'm going to go 1 more. I've got all 4 ends here, so I'm carefully putting my awl in there to find the throughway without poking any of those reeds in half. All right, so there's 3 loose loops. This is a good place to, again, line up your filler. I'm pinching with my thumb and my finger here. I know my lasher is tight. I'm pushing up over any loose with my finger. Just lining those up. That is snug. I'm trying to fix that to go right up and over that mitered tip. And pull that snug. I see this peeking up on this side, so I'm just going to push that down and make sure things are even. Your weaver ends tend to lift up a little bit, so push them down, line them up with the rim. I'm checking the inside to see if my lasher comes up and lays like that. How is it holding down the inside of the weaver? And I think that'll hold it nicely. I am going to give the weaver a little bit of a trim so that it's at the same angle that my lasher is going to lay. Just a nice little detail. It's good to have a variety of snips. Can you see that more clearly now, how it just lays there nicely at the same angle? You want the same consideration for the front. As I bring this down to tighten it over, that actually is a very nice finish. That top corner, we could trim back ever so slightly. This is a lot of personal preference in these finishing lines. I like to see all the angles going in the same direction. I'm just trimming off that corner. And even though that doesn't look very orderly, we know that as we lay this lasher over, it hides, gives it plenty to hold on to. Look at that finish.
Isn't it nice when it comes together?
It's really nice. And it still surprises me after all these years sometimes. So here's another way to end. At the beginning of this basket, we hid it down behind the weavers. If I were to do that again, it's just a little lumpy and cross lashing, and you're going to see it easily. Sometimes you can hide those things with a handle or other methods. On a bigger basket, it's not quite as noticeable. But on this one, I'm going to show you how to tuck it right up here under the rim. See how I've slid my awl, just making enough space. This is a very long tail. I'm not going to try to pull the whole thing through. I'm cutting it way back. Just even this is still very generous. and I am going to go under the rim, right where I came out, and push it up through the rim, right where my awl is. I actually want to take my awl out of the way, and I'm gonna pull this up. You can hear how tight it is, how snug. It's not really tight, it's nice and wet and it's snug, and I'm just pulling it up between the rim so you can't even see it. It looks the same out here. I've gone in through each hole once, and I went under and up, and now I'm going to trim this just behind my filler, the round reed there. Is that the right trimmer? I might even take a speck off with these old reliables, and then with my awl I'm going to tuck that end right back down under the filler, and you won't even see. Look at that finish. That is a nice oval shape. So I have a piece in the bottom. It all looks great. If you want to square it up, now's the time to do that, where you would pinch your corners at this point. You can catch that in some of our tips and tricks, but this is such a pretty oval. I'm going to leave it square, rectangle to oval.
I think that looks great. And if you want to add a handle in the back or anything else, you can check out our YouTube video on adding handles. And otherwise, I think this is ready to use. So thank you for making that with us today. And we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you everybody for joining us. Thanks.